The cold hiss of the automatic glass doors cut through the air like a sharp blade. For a brief moment, the sunlight flooding through the Chicago skyline seemed to swallow the man in a light blue shirt, khaki pants, and clean sneakers. No one inside that gleaming bank lobby realized they were about to make a grave mistake. They were on the verge of turning away the very founder of this building. Anthony Walker, 40, 5 years old, stepped into the space he had built with nothing but his own 2 hands. The high ceilings soared above. Floor. 2. Ceiling windows poured golden light across the polished marble floors, and the entire place radiated the flawless rhythm of an institution designed to inspire trust and prosperity. But today, Anthony wasn't wearing a tailored suit or posing as the powerful leader gracing the covers of financial magazines. What they saw was just a middle-aged man, unassuming, with sharp eyes hidden behind a calm exterior. He was there for one simple reason: to withdraw $15,000 from his personal account, a routine transaction, legitimate and unquestionable. Yet in an instant, Anthony sensed that this familiar stage was about to replay the quiet, merciless prejudice he had seen too many times before. At the counter beside him, another customer was just finishing. A white man in a charcoal blazer walked away smiling, holding $20,000 in crisp bills that had been handed over without hesitation, without questions, without delay. Anthony caught the number on the slip as it flashed by. His chest tightened. The pattern was too familiar, too undeniable. He clenched the strap of his bag slightly, though his face remained calm, because Anthony understood that true power didn't always need to be displayed. Sometimes power was best concealed, waiting for others to expose themselves. Just a few steps later, Anthony stood at the teller window, where a blonde woman in a navy blazer sat waiting. A small nameplate pinned to her chest read, "Lauren Mitchell." Unlike the warmth he had just witnessed, she didn't bother to look up. Her red, painted nails tapped on the counter as her eyes skimmed over him as if he were an inconvenience. "Fill this out," she said flatly, offering none of the usual courtesy. Anthony accepted the slip with a faint smile. This attitude wasn't new. He had lived long enough to know that the smallest details often revealed the biggest truths. Calmly, he filled in the form, his signature steady, then slid both the slip and his driver's license back across the counter. Lauren glanced down, saw the figure of 15,000, and without a moment's pause pushed it back. "We can't process this." Anthony frowned. "Excuse me, what?" Lauren crossed her arms, her tone hardening. "Our bank does not allow large cash withdrawals like this." In that instant, the image of the man in the charcoal blazer with his 20,000 replayed in Anthony's mind. He looked toward the glass doors where that figure had just disappeared, and his voice cut through the air, cold and precise. "What about the man before me? He withdrew 20,000 and you didn't hesitate." Lauren faltered, her lips pressing into a thin line. Her eyes flicked toward the glass office behind her. Inside, Clara Jennings, the branch manager, stood with arms folded, watching. Clara's gaze met Lauren's, and with the slightest nod, she gave silent approval, lending her teller strength. Lauren turned back, her voice sharper, colder. "That case was different." Anthony stepped closer, his voice low but weighted like iron. "Different how?" The silence was thick, and then Clara emerged from her office. The sharp staccato of her high heels echoed on the marble floor like a judge's gavel. She stopped at the counter, a polished smile fixed on her face. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm the manager here. We have special security procedures for high-value transactions." Anthony locked eyes with her. "Security procedures," he repeated slowly, emphasizing each word. "Or selective trust, deciding who is worthy and who is not." The atmosphere in the lobby shifted instantly. Anthony's heartbeat remained steady, but his eyes blazed colder than ever. Clara's smile stayed in place, but the muscle in her jaw tightened. She was used to people lowering their gaze, accepting rejection as something natural. But this time, the man standing across from her was not just another customer. In that moment, everyone in the bank believed they were speaking to an ordinary man, someone unremarkable, reaching beyond his place. No one imagined that the person they were pushing aside was the very soul of the building itself. And Anthony Walker, dressed simply with eyes hardened by years of witnessing injustice, knew the real battle had only just begun. Whispers rippled through the lobby. Some customers turned to look, while others pretended to shuffle papers, their eyes fixed on the counter where Anthony stood. The steady rhythm of the bank suddenly faltered, like a taut string about to snap. Anthony rested both hands lightly on the counter, his fingers tapping slowly in time with his heartbeat. In his mind, the years of building this empire replayed. The cramped rented office, the sleepless nights counting every dollar, the dream of creating a bank where anyone, no matter their color or origin, would be treated with dignity. And now, in the gleaming hall of Walker Financial, he was being treated as an outsider. Across from him, Lauren drew a deep breath, as if drawing strength from Clara standing behind her. She repeated firmly, "We cannot process this transaction." Anthony studied her longer than necessary. In that gaze, Lauren sensed something unsettling, not the glare of an angry customer, but the calm of a man who knew he was being tested and was ready to respond. He leaned in, his voice low and heavy. "I am not asking whether you can or cannot. I am asking why. What policy allows the man before me to withdraw 20,000 while I am denied 15? Clara interjected, her stiff smile fixed in place. "Sir, every transaction is unique. We must ensure the safety of our clients and our system." Anthony shot back, his words sharp and clipped. "Safety for whom? For your customers or for the prejudice in your eyes?" The air thickened instantly. An older woman near the service desk swallowed hard. She looked at Anthony with a flicker of sympathy, but quickly turned away, afraid of being pulled into the confrontation. The silence of the bystanders weighed heavier than words. Lauren grew restless, her nails clicking against the counter. Clara folded her arms, her gaze cold, then tilted her head ever so slightly, a small signal, but one that carried the weight of command. From the far corner, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed. Brian Holt, the head of security, tall and broad, shouldered, advanced with unwavering focus. To him, this was nothing more than an incident to resolve, a troublesome customer to remove. Anthony did not turn. He had heard the rhythm of those footsteps long before, the familiar cadence of enforcement. His pulse was steady, though heat surged through his veins. Clara lowered her voice deliberately, making sure the entire lobby could hear. "Sir, if you do not cooperate, we will have to call security." Anthony lifted his head, a faint smile cutting across his face like a blade. "Cooperate? I have provided my ID, completed the paperwork. My account is right in front of you. I have followed every rule. What about you? What exactly are you cooperating with?" Brian loomed close, the smell of leather from his belt and the weight of his breath pressing down like a warning. The entire room held its breath. One more step, and this ordinary-looking man would be dragged out like a criminal. But Anthony didn't flinch. He stood tall, his eyes locked on Clara. Behind his calm expression, he measured every detail. The way Lauren avoided his gaze, the calculating tilt of Clara's head, the cowardly slunts of the crowd. All of it would serve as evidence. For a fleeting moment, he saw his younger self reflected in the glass, the young man begging for loans, humiliated at other counters. But today, he was no longer powerless. They still didn't know. No one here realized that the man they were trying to cast out was the very soul, the owner of the entire bank. And with a single phone call, their careers could collapse in an instant. Anthony allowed a faint smile to return, a silent warning. The storm had not yet broken, but the sky had already changed. Brian Holt's footsteps struck the tiled floor like the beat of war drums. The bank lobby had turned into a strange theater, the audience silent, the main actor's true role still hidden. Anthony Walker stood motionless, shoulders steady, his eyes glowing like forged steel. "Sir, I will have to ask you to leave." Brian's voice rumbled, low and final, leaving no room for negotiation. Anthony didn't turn toward him. His gaze stayed locked on Clara Jennings, carrying the weight of an entire confrontation. His tone was calm yet unyielding, each word falling like a hammer. "You know this isn't procedure. This is discrimination, blatant and undeniable, right here in this bank." Clara's smile remained, stiff and porcelain. She replied, pressing each word. "We are acting according to protocol. If you are dissatisfied, you may file a complaint elsewhere." Around them, customers drew in sharp breaths. An elderly woman gripped the strap of her purse tighter. A young man raised his phone to record discreetly. Everyone understood this was no longer a simple transaction, but the moment the truth was being stripped bare. Brian stepped closer, his broad hand landing on Anthony's arm, a touch that carried the weight of command. "Please come with me." For an instant, Anthony felt his body pulled back into the past, the times he had been turned away, the suspicious stares, the countless moments he had been forced to prove himself tenfold. But this was not the past. This was now, and he was no longer the powerless young man he once was. He exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket. The movement was deliberate, unhurried. His phone lit up as the camera rolled. His voice rang out, clear and steady. "You are refusing to process my transaction, even though I have provided full documentation and valid ID. You just allowed another customer to withdraw $20,000 without question. I want the world to see this truth." Lauren's face drained of color. Clara froze for a fraction of a second, then masked it with an icy stare. Brian hesitated briefly, then tightened his grip. The sudden pull made Anthony stumble, his shoulder colliding with the guard's chest. Gasps broke through the room. A few women cried out, and a young man whispered, "God, they're really doing this." Anthony was shoved toward the glass doors. They burst open, and a gust of cold wind slashed in like a blade. He staggered, his back striking the doorframe, but his eyes never left Clara. She stood inside, her gaze alight with false authority. Then came the deepest humiliation. Brian pulled Anthony's ID from the paperwork and tossed it to the ground. The small plastic card hit the pavement with a hollow crack, a simple act that carried a cruel verdict. You don't belong here. The air froze. Anthony felt fire surge in his chest, the fire he had suppressed for years, born of memory, of anger, of wounded pride. And then, a flicker of the unexpected. Another figure appeared, Jamal Rivers, 30. 4, a secondary guard, his skin dark, his posture weary, but his eyes warm. He bent down, picked up the ID, brushed it clean, and handed it to Anthony with both hands. His voice was quiet, just enough for Anthony to hear. "This happens here all the time. You're not the first." The words cut like a knife, but they also felt like a hand on his shoulder. Anthony gripped the ID tightly, feeling its edges press against his skin. Jamal's whisper confirmed what he had long feared, that the bank he built was harboring the very injustice he had sworn to eliminate. Anthony lifted his head and, for the first time, allowed a smile. Not one of joy, but the kind that warned of a storm about to break. He pulled out his phone again and dialed a familiar number. The line clicked before the second ring. "Richard Cole speaking." Anthony spoke slowly, each word precise, making sure Jamal could hear. "Come to the Chicago branch, immediately." The wind lashed his face, sharp and bitter, but inside Anthony, the fire roared. He knew this performance had only a few acts left before the stage collapsed completely. 15 minutes. It sounded short, but for Anthony Walker, every passing second was like a slow needle pricking his pride. He stood just beyond the glass doors, his ID still in hand, feeling every curious glance flick over him before quickly looking away. Inside, the bank carried on as if nothing had happened. The hum of counting machines, the sharp clicks of shoes across marble, the ring of service bells. It was as though no one had just witnessed a customer being thrown out of the very place he entrusted his fortune. Jamal Rivers remained nearby, his hands resting on his hips, his eyes showing a flicker of outrage, but shadowed by fatigue. He knew there was little he could do, at least for now. Then from the far end of the street, a sleek black sedan glided up and stopped cleanly in front of the branch. The door swung open, and Richard Cole, 52 years old, stepped out. His salt and pepper hair, perfectly tailored grey suit, and neatly knotted tie needed no introduction. Without a word, with only his straight-backed stride and razor-sharp eyes, the entire atmosphere shifted. Ethan Holt, the guard still blocking the entrance, straightened instinctively. Inside, Clara Jennings froze at the sight of Richard. Her face paled before she quickly forced on a mask of composure and hurried toward the counter. Anthony followed Richard inside, his simple sneakers striking evenly against the marble floor. This time, no one stopped him. No one dared. Richard didn't need to look around. His voice cut through the air, cold and hard as steel. "What exactly is happening here? And why was the CEO of this bank forced out like some kind of fraud?" Silence fell like a curtain. Customers and staff alike stood frozen, from the curious onlookers to the trembling tellers behind the counter. Lauren Mitchell bit her lip, her face drained of color. Clara opened her mouth, her voice trembling beneath the thin veil of professionalism. "Mr. Cole, there must have been some misunderstanding." "Silence." Richard cut her off. He didn't raise his voice, but authority filled every inch of the room. He turned to Anthony, giving him a small nod, a subtle gesture that confirmed the true place of the man in front of them. Anthony said nothing. He let Richard take the lead. It was deliberate, a strategy to let those who thought themselves in power be exposed by another's hand. Richard fixed his gaze on Clara. "In front of all these customers, you refused a legal transaction, you never checked the account, and then you ordered security to drag the CEO of this institution out onto the street. Answer me." Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. Lauren shrank back, her eyes brimming red. Brian Holt, the guard, turned his face away, unable to withstand Richard's stare. The truth could no longer be hidden. The bank lobby had transformed into a courtroom without a gavel, and every eye was fixed on Anthony Walker, the man they had dismissed minutes ago, now revealed as the very soul of the building. Anthony drew a steady breath, his heartbeat strong and sure. He knew the play they had staged was over, but the verdict was only just beginning. The air grew heavier, every breath in the lobby caught as if waiting for thunder to strike. Richard Cole stood tall, his eyes sweeping coldly across each face. He didn't need to raise his voice. A single glance was enough to silence the room. "Clara Jennings." He spoke her name, firm as a summons. Clara swallowed hard and took half a step forward. Her eyes flickered toward the polished glass walls as if searching for an escape, but there was none. Why was a customer with valid ID and a verified account denied his transaction? Richard demanded, each word landing with weight. Clara tried to keep her smile, but her voice betrayed a tremor. We were only following security procedures. Large sums require additional verification." Richard cut her off, his tone sharp as ice. "Additional verification? Then why was the man before him allowed to withdraw $20,000 without a single question?" The silence that followed was deafening. Clara froze, unable to respond. Behind her, Lauren Mitchell's fingers knotted tightly, her nails pressing into her skin until they turned white. Anthony watched, his heart heavy. There was no triumph in him, only the crushing weight of realization. The bank he had built had allowed prejudice to seep into its very foundation. Richard turned sharply to Lauren. "And you? You were the one who directly refused the transaction. Did you check the system? Did you verify the account, or did you simply look at his face and decide?" Lauren's voice cracked, barely audible. I was only following." "Following whose orders?" Richard interrupted. The entire lobby seemed to stop breathing. Lauren lowered her head, silent. But that silence spoke louder than any excuse. Richard's gaze shifted to Brian Holt, the towering guard who stood stiff like a statue. "And you? Your duty is to protect customers. Yet what did you do? You forced the CEO out of his own bank. Do you think that falls under procedure?" Brian swallowed, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting away. His broad shoulders now hung heavy with shame. From across the room, an elderly woman with silver hair, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke out. "I saw everything. He's telling the truth. The man before withdrew more money, and no one asked him a thing." Her words cut through the false veneer like a blade. Other customers nodded in agreement, their whispers rising. The truth could no longer be hidden beneath the glossy paint of so-called procedures. Anthony's gaze found Jamal Rivers. The younger guard gave him a subtle nod, a quiet signal. The moment had come. Richard drew in a deep breath, then spoke slowly, each word tearing through the air. "I am declaring right now, Clara Jennings, you are suspended effective immediately. Lauren Mitchell, your violation is officially recorded and will be sent directly to the disciplinary board. Brian Holt, you and your entire security team will undergo mandatory retraining. If this ever happens again." He paused, his eyes cold as steel. Justice will not stop at termination. The lobby erupted in hushed murmurs. Clara's face turned pale, her lips trembling. Lauren's eyes brimmed with tears. Brian kept his head bowed, fists clenched tight. Anthony remained still, gripping his ID, feeling the edges press into his skin like a reminder of the humiliation he had endured in the very institution he had created. But now, the balance of power had shifted. The bank stood silent, awaiting the final judgment, and every eye, from customer to staff, turned to Anthony Walker, the man they had dismissed only minutes ago, now revealed as the CEO, the founder, the very soul of Walker Financial. A storm had just swept through, and this was only the beginning. Anthony's hand clenched tightly around his ID, the veins on the back of his hand standing out. Every gaze in the bank lobby pierced him like needles, but he no longer felt pain. What he felt now was a strange fusion of fury, pride, and a deep sorrow. He walked slowly toward the teller counter, each step striking the marble floor like the blow of a hammer. The sound of his simple sneakers, normally unremarkable, now echoed through the heavy silence. Lauren Mitchell instantly stepped aside, her eyes swollen red, her lips trembling, unable to utter a word. Anthony placed his ID and the withdrawal slip back on the counter. His voice was low, resonant, each word carved deep. "Proceed with the transaction." No one dared object. Clara Jennings, once so defiant, now kept her head bowed, her shoulders trembling. Richard Cole stood with arms folded, his eyes sharp as blades, ready to crush any resistance. Another employee, younger, her name tag reading Evelyn Tran, cautiously approached the computer. Her hands trembled as she typed in the account number, sneaking a glance at Anthony before lowering her gaze. On the screen, the massive balance appeared. Undeniable, indisputable. The money counter whirred to life, the rhythmic sound like a drumbeat announcing the restoration of truth. Crisp bills slid neatly into stacks. Evelyn placed them in the tray and pushed them toward Anthony. $15,000, sir, she said, her voice unsteady but clear. Anthony didn't rush to take the cash. His eyes swept down the counter, where the other employees kept their heads lowered, avoiding his gaze. Then he turned back to face the crowd of customers. "This is not just my transaction. This is a test of the entire system, and you have failed that test." His voice rang firm and sharp. Some customers nodded, others whispered, "That's right," and a few raised their phones to record, their hands shaking but determined. Richard stepped forward, his voice cold as ice. "What happened here today will be reported directly to the board of directors. Every employee involved will be investigated and disciplined. There will be no room for bias at Walker Financial." In the crowd, Jamal Rivers clenched his fists, his eyes glistening as if freed from invisible chains. Anthony turned to him, giving a slight nod, a brief moment that carried recognition and a silent promise that fairness would be restored. Anthony finally picked up the stack of cash, the cool texture of the bills sliding through his fingers. But what he held was more than $15,000. It was dignity, the affirmation that his place, that anyone's place, could not be dictated by prejudice in someone else's eyes. He turned, his gaze landing on Clara. His voice was low, but it carried across the entire room. "All you had to do was check the ID. Just one step. But you chose otherwise." Clara trembled, her eyes brimming with tears she could not release. Anthony said nothing more. He walked toward the door, his posture calm yet radiating a power that silenced the room. As the glass doors closed behind him, only then did the others exhale, as if they had just weathered a storm. But deep down, they all knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a reckoning. The glass doors closed behind him, and the Chicago wind struck Anthony Walker's face with an icy force, as if trying to erase what had just happened. But the fire inside him still burned, fierce and unstoppable. He walked slowly along the sidewalk, each steady breath holding back the storm of anger threatening to erupt. Behind him came hesitant footsteps. Anthony turned. It was Jamal Rivers. The young guard stopped, his hands shoved into his pockets, his eyes a mixture of shame and resolve. "Mr. Walker." Jamal's voice was low, almost a whisper. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop what happened. Here, this happens all the time. I see it. But..." His words caught in his throat. Anthony looked at him, his gaze softening. He saw the weariness etched into the early lines at the corners of Jamal's eyes, the silent frustration buried under countless shifts. He did not blame him. He understood. "You did the right thing by returning my ID," Anthony said, his tone low but weighted. "Sometimes a single small act is enough to reveal a person's character." Jamal lowered his head, his breathing heavy. "Honestly, I've thought about leaving this place. I'm tired of watching customers of color get asked for extra documents while others are welcomed like royalty. But I need this job. I have a family. Kids." Anthony placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. That touch was not just comfort, it was a promise. "You won't have to endure that anymore. I need people like you to stay, to help rebuild this place." Jamal's eyes widened in surprise. He looked up at Anthony, as if needing to be sure he had heard correctly. Anthony gave a faint smile, then pulled a portion from the stack of money he had just withdrawn and pressed it into Jamal's hands. "Take it. Take a day off. Spend it with your family. The rest, consider it a reminder. Fairness is not something to beg for. It is something worth protecting." Jamal hesitated, then accepted it with trembling hands. His eyes filled with tears, but this time not from exhaustion, but from seeing a hope he thought he had lost. "I'll stay, sir," he said firmly, his voice steady now. "If you're going to clean out the rot in here, I want to help." Anthony nodded. He lifted his head, looking at the gleaming glass tower behind him. Once, he had proudly called it a legacy, a symbol of success. But now, he saw only a fortress of falsehood, a place where power had been twisted into a weapon of prejudice. He turned back to Jamal, a faint smile touching his lips. "You'll see. The storm isn't over. This is just the opening act." On the sidewalk, the two men stood side by side. One, a CEO rejected by his own bank. The other, a guard accustomed to silence. Each carried scars of a different kind, but now they had found each other as allies. In that moment, Anthony knew this reckoning would not just transform one branch, it would change all of Walker Financial. And he, the founder who had been humiliated on his own ground, would rewrite the rules from the very beginning. The next morning, sunlight poured through the towering glass windows of Walker Financial's headquarters in downtown Chicago. But inside, there was no peace. News of the incident at the branch had spread like wildfire. A video of Anthony being dragged out by security had already surfaced on social media. Within hours, it had racked up hundreds of thousands of views, with furious comments flooding in. "A black CEO thrown out of his own bank. Unbelievable. This is living proof of discrimination." On the 30th floor, light glinted off the long glass conference table as the board of directors sat in tense silence. Richard Cole stood at the head, his eyes scanning each face. Beside him, Anthony Walker sat composed in a crisp shirt, his calm gaze hiding a fire that refused to be extinguished. A regional director finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. "We must act immediately. The entire media is aimed straight at Walker Financial. They want answers." Another voice chimed in, his concern clearly more about stock prices than dignity. "If this is mishandled, market value could nosedive. Investors won't forgive us." Anthony leaned back slightly, then forward, his voice resonating through the room. "What I care about is not the numbers on an electronic board. What I care about is the dignity of our customers, fairness for every person who walks through our doors. And yesterday, our own system betrayed that." No one dared interrupt. Each word fell heavy, thickening the air. Richard followed, his tone like a blade. "Clara Jennings is suspended. Lauren Mitchell will face the disciplinary board, and Brian Holt, along with his security team, are required to undergo retraining. But this is not enough. This is not the fault of a few individuals. This is rot within the structure itself." Anthony nodded, his eyes sweeping the table. "I will personally oversee a full-scale purge across the system. Every branch, every manager, every employee. Anyone who brings prejudice into their work will have no place at Walker Financial." Outside the boardroom, the lobby was packed with reporters. Cameras, microphones, and flashing lights filled the space. They knew this scandal would dominate headlines, a shockwave for the entire banking industry. The conference doors opened. Anthony and Richard stepped out. Reporters surged forward, their questions rapid and relentless. "Mr. Walker, is it true you were thrown out of your own bank?" What will you do about the Chicago branch? Is this proof of systemic discrimination within Walker Financial? Anthony stopped in the middle of the chaos. He lifted his ID card high for the cameras. His voice rang out, powerful and commanding, cutting through the noise without a microphone. Yesterday, they dismissed this card. But this is not only proof of my identity, it is proof for millions of customers who have been dismissed out there. Walker Financial will change, and I will make sure that justice is no longer a slogan on the wall, but a reality every single day. The flash of cameras erupted. For a moment, the crowd fell silent. Then a wave of cheers and applause broke out. It was a rare moment, a spark of hope in the middle of the storm. Among the security staff downstairs, Jamal Rivers watched, his heart pounding. For the first time, he believed that fairness was no longer a distant dream. Anthony lowered the ID, his eyes stern, his voice unwavering. We will rewrite the rules, starting today. And the entire glass tower, once a symbol of cold power, now trembled under the weight of a new promise. A week after the incident, the atmosphere across Walker Financial was no longer the same. From small suburban branches to the grand headquarters downtown, everything was wound tight like a string ready to snap. Employees whispered to one another. Managers walked the halls with lowered eyes, and customers looked around with a new edge of caution. Everyone knew a storm of full-scale inspection was sweeping through. Anthony Walker chose not to remain silent. He immediately established the Internal Fairness Committee, with Richard Cole placed in direct command. Confidential emails were dispatched, midnight emergency meetings were held, and every complaint once buried in the system, every grievance from customers, every unresolved report was dragged into the light. At the North Avenue branch, a 38-year-old manager named Mark Dillard was caught giving priority to wealthy white clients while deliberately delaying applications from immigrants. Security footage was played during the Monday morning meeting in front of the entire staff. Anthony sat at the back of the room, silent, his gaze sharp as a blade. Mark managed only a few stammered excuses before hearing the decision. Suspended immediately. At the South Branch, a group of young tellers who routinely ignored modestly dressed customers while catering to those wearing expensive watches were exposed when a hidden recording captured them. The audio played, "These people probably don't have a dime. Let them wait." The room froze. Once again, Anthony was there, staring at each bowed head in silence. The atmosphere in each branch resembled a public trial, and one by one, every location became a courtroom. Yet what surprised Anthony most was the sudden rise of silent allies. More Jamals emerged everywhere. Longtime employees who had stayed quiet now sent in detailed reports. Young tellers came forward with stories of injustice they had witnessed, and even some branch managers stepped up to admit responsibility, confessing they had looked away for too long. Every time it happened, Anthony listened. He was not there only to punish, but to rebuild. He wanted to create a new generation of employees, ones who saw fairness not as a slogan, but as a non-negotiable standard of survival. The media poured fuel onto the fire with bold headlines. Walker Financial launches unprecedented purge, and CEO thrown out of his own bank. A shocking scandal sparks sweeping reform. Stocks wavered for a moment, but customer trust unexpectedly soared. People flooded into branches, not just to deposit money, but to see with their own eyes that change was truly underway. An elderly woman, her eyes wet, clasped Anthony's hand and said, "Thank you. At last, someone has the courage to stand up." For Anthony, each word was both a sting and a source of strength. He knew this battle would not end in a day or two. But now the storm had stripped away the dust that had covered the words, respect and fairness, displayed on every wall. Late that night, Anthony sat in his office, city lights spilling in through the glass. On his desk lay stacks of disciplinary files, restructuring plans, and personnel reports. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them to look at the plaque etched with the name, Walker Financial, Trust for Every Home. The vow he had spoken on the very first day of founding returned to him. This bank was built to protect the vulnerable, not to trample them. And he told himself, this is only the beginning. The real challenge is keeping this fire alive. The day of the system-wide meeting was set for a Monday morning. Walker Financial's headquarters was packed, with thousands of employees from branches large and small joining online, their tense faces reflected on the massive screen hanging in the center of the hall. Anthony Walker stepped onto the stage, not in an expensive suit, but in a plain white shirt and a simple tie. That simplicity only made his presence more commanding. He paused for a few seconds, letting silence weigh over the room, then began. "I am Anthony Walker, the founder of this bank. The man who, just 1 week ago, was thrown out of his own branch." A wave of murmurs rippled across the hall. On the screen, many faces lowered in shame. Anthony raised his voice echoing clear. They refused to look at this card. They refused to see the truth, and in that moment, they revealed what lies beneath. A system rotten with prejudice and complacency. He stopped, his eyes piercing the camera, as if staring directly into every employee on the other side. But today, I am not here to recount my humiliation. I am here to declare this. Walker Financial will no longer be a place that tolerates favoritism. It will return to its founding mission, to serve everyone without discrimination. Applause thundered, but Anthony raised his hand for silence. His voice hardened. Starting today, all 312 branches will undergo a fairness audit. Anyone found using their position to impose bias will be removed. No exceptions. The sharp intake of breath was audible across the hall. Then Anthony's tone softened, his eyes glinting with hope. But also, from today, anyone who proves integrity will be rewarded. I want to introduce someone. He gestured toward the hall. Jamal Rivers stepped forward, his face still uncertain, but his eyes filled with resolve. He still wore his security uniform, but his shoulders stood prouder than ever. This is Jamal. Last week, when everyone else stayed silent, he was the one who stood up. He picked my ID up off the ground and returned it with respect. Anthony turned to him, his voice slow but resonant. From this day forward, you are officially appointed as head of security and fairness training for the entire system. From a silent guard, you will become the guardian of our core values. The hall erupted with applause. Jamal bowed his head, his eyes brimming, his hands trembling with emotion. He had never imagined that one small act could alter his destiny so profoundly. Anthony returned to the microphone, his tone now warm but unwavering. Walker Financial will change, not only through policies, but through people. I want every customer who walks in here to feel welcome, not judged. This is not just a bank. This is a promise, and I will keep that promise. In that moment, the hall thundered with clapping, mingled with the sound of muffled sobs. The image of Anthony and Jamal standing side by side, a CEO and a guard, became a symbol that spread across newspapers and social media. Outside, the Chicago sun blazed, reflecting off the giant glass tower. It was no longer just a monument of cold power. It had become a beacon of light, a place where fairness was rewritten and every person was valued. Anthony closed his eyes briefly, breathing deep. He knew the battle was not over, but he also knew that today he had reclaimed the soul of Walker Financial. In a world where money can make people forget their humanity, Anthony Walker's story reminds us that fairness is not a privilege, but a fundamental right. A simple nod, an ID recognized for its true value, can often be the line between humiliation and respect. If you believe that no one deserves to be judged by skin color, clothing, or prejudice, hit like to help this story spread. Don't forget to subscribe to follow the journeys ahead, where truth is revealed and justice is reclaimed. And I want to hear from you. Leave a short comment with just 2 words, fairness, to remind everyone that we all deserve to be treated equally.